Hi guys, good happy Sunday, happy Sunday. This is Karen here, your favorite virtual assistant. We back again with Emily R. Williams with another lovely conversation. And once again, I'm always excited for all these conversations. So I'm ready. So Gail, let's kick it off. Let's kick off
Yep. Hi,
today's
everybody. Happy Sunday. And I am Gail Withers. I'm a corporate trainer and I help companies empower their teams to perform better by designing training programs. And today we're happy to have Emily Williams with us again. And we're talking about change in the workplace. So, Emily, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then we're going to get the ball rolling with some questions.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Karen and Gail, for having me again this Sunday.
no
I
problem.
love being on the show with you too. My name is Emily R. Williams. I coach women of color to accelerate change at work.
That's it. Well, welcome, Emily. So I'm gonna start the ball rolling. So in preparation for this live, I did a poll. I'm just gonna read from my phone, and we asked our LinkedIn network who should be responsible for managing and affecting workplace change, and they had a few options. It could have been the HR department, the employees, the leaders, and of course there's the other where they left their comments. And it was interesting. 67% of the respondents felt that leaders should be responsible for this change. 13% felt it was HR, 12% the employees, and 8% felt that, it could have been a combination or maybe some other person. So, Emily, I'm going to start by asking you, for example, what can each party do to facilitate organizational change?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So, first of all, it's got to be give and take, right, on each side. I'm not surprised by the results of your polls because for so long, everyone has believed that change has to come from the top,
From the
right?
top,
That
yeah.
top leadership in
Mm-hmm.
the organization is responsible for change. And I think that that's really interesting because at the same time, we're often dissatisfied with the impact of that decision making when it only comes from the top, right? And I think a really good example of that is when we look at Twitter right now, right? I mean, Twitter has been in the news
Oh yeah.
for the last couple weeks. Precisely because they got a new CEO. That CEO comes in, makes a bunch of changes, results in a bunch of employees losing their jobs, and then other kinds of chaos that have been very apparent from the outside, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when we say that, or when we expect that change should really come from the top, we also have to ask ourselves, but how have we responded to the impact, or how have we been impacted by that decision making when it only comes from the top?
Mm.
So I would say that definitely that the change process, it must be give and take from the leaders, executives of a company, as well as the employees, right? We have to, one, employees, it's really important that employees understand the changes that are taking place. And then also that they understand why they're taking place, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the same time, leaders have to also understand that employees have a day-to-day reality, right? And that day-to-day reality will often be impacted much earlier than the actual change is realized. So, in that sense, leaders too need to be able to exercise some give and take and really be responsive to what the employees need and really communicative with the employees and also understanding of what they need, and then also their thoughts and their ideas for the change and the change process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good
So,
point. I didn't even
um,
think about it like that.
yeah, so are you saying then that it's not, it's more of, especially from the leader's point of view, the leader is key because they have to understand what that change is going to be, why it's important, how it affects the rest of the organization. But I think the biggest point for us is communication. It's not only the actual process of communicating it to the team, but how it's communicated. Because if you just say, okay, listen, guys, tomorrow we're doing this process, a totally different way, and that's it. They don't understand how they fit into the bigger picture. So if you're working with a leader who doesn't understand, or who's like more of a dictator and it's my way or no way, and it's not that the change isn't good, it's that how they're communicating it is not good. How do we navigate that, Emily? What do you suggest we do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And oftentimes it's not only the communication, but it's also about, what is the change actually responding to? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there needs to be a new process, why? What is that new process responding to? Was there some kind of inefficiency? Did it
Mm-hmm.
create, a negative outcome for the workplace? There has to be something that the change is responding to, right? That's actually what helps employees understand why the change is necessary. So, that part is important, but then also, yes, how things are communicated make all the difference in the world, right? Often, if we need to change a process as a leader, you know, giving employees 1 day notice is not enough time,
Yeah.
right? So the timing of that communication is incredibly important, and it also needs to be respectful, right? Not saying that people, intentionally go in with timelines that could be perceived as disrespectful, but when you're an executive leader, sometimes you can be very much removed from the day-to-day realities of your employees. And
Mm-hmm.
when we don't consider that in giving timelines for change, then that can create more stress for our employees, right? Which then only makes the change process that much more difficult if we're working with a team of stressed out employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
they're
That's a good
already
point
stressed
too.
out before the change.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's a good point, Emily. But also, the only thing I would add on from my own experience of changes in corporations that I have worked on is when the changes brought on, or they mentioned the change. One, like you just mentioned, that they don't explain it correctly, right? Then when I read the changes, a lot of the times the people that are making the changes, they don't do the active work every day. Where me as the employee might see a benefit, right, or might understand a benefit of doing it this particular way. And I noticed that a lot in one particular job that I had. I had a certain position, and I did the job, and I was able to figure out how to do it easier but more effectively. So when they made the whole transitional change, I felt like explaining it, they didn't really care to hear it. It's more like this is how I want it to be done, and that's because I'm the manager or I'm the supervisor or whatever position they had, and that's why I want you to do it this way, right? And I think that's a part of it too. And I understand that change is important, but
Yeah.
also maybe taking into account a little bit of people that actually do that particular job. If this is going to be a change within a particular job or a certain task that you're doing, I think that's important to take into account as well. And also just allowing the person to maybe, if that's the ultimate change, because it's not, as an employer, it's not my decision. I can only make suggestions, but I don't have the last word. And sometimes change could be make you work a little bit harder than necessary, right? When it comes to a particular task, I think.
See, well, now, Karen, I disagree with you about the part that, like, you don't have like the power as an employee. See, I think that
Hmm.
that's where the give and take actually is. That it's really important for employees to say, okay, well, here's how I'm being impacted by this change, and
Hmm.
here's actually my solution for that, or here's my suggestion for that. That part is incredibly important
Right.
to
Okay.
ensure effective change, right? Because as you mentioned, it's easy for a leader to say, "New process. This is what it needs to be."
Right.
But then, if that creates more work for the person who has to do it,
Right.
or the person who has to do it actually has a better way, that's then when the leader needs to say, okay, all right, great. Needs to trust their employees and say, okay, my employee knows best here. I'm going to take Karen's advice. We're going to implement that into the change process. And once there's that give and take, that's when we can really see forward movement from which everyone can live with, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think that it's really, really important as the employee to engage in that continual conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a
Yeah,
good point
I
too.
think those are very good points, and I've
Mhm.
had the experience where, you may have a leader and they think their change is good, but they don't want to spend the time to engage the rest of the team
Right.
for
Mm-hmm.
whom it may not work because the team, they're the ones executing. And then you have to pull back that leader and you say, okay, you know what? You need to look at it this way. Can you spend an hour to have that conversation with your team? And you know it's going to be valuable versus the 300 million hours you're going to take trying to clean that mess up because you are not executing the change yourself. Your team is the one executing the change. And
Right.
it's all about managing expectations. And some leaders want their change to happen immediately. And most of the time it's impossible. There's this transition space of time that you need to allow for your team to get accustomed to the change, understand how it's working, understand how they're going to execute it. And I always say, because I like to link all these things back to training and customer service. Sometimes when you go into an organization and you get bad customer service, it's because sometimes there is a change in the background and they haven't been made aware. And you, the customer, you're the one that suffers. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's being done deliberately. It's something happening at the back end that they weren't, aware of. So people sometimes push back on training, and I try not to use the word, in a formal setting. Training is just making people aware of what they need to do, when they need to do it, and how they need to do it, especially when there's a change. And change is a big deal. Change is a big deal.
No, that's true. I agree. I mean, you know what? I was now that we're talking, I also thought it just came to mind, right? Um, Especially now, women are more higher positions, and sometimes as a woman, I wonder, I'm sure creating change, especially when you're dealing with either people who have their own ideas, whether it's the top people ahead of you or people that you actually other team member that you're responsible for, right? And I do wonder, some people, how hard is that must be as a woman just to be able to try to pivot and make a change, and maybe people not understanding or people not respecting your experience, but all they see that you're a woman,
And
because
you
I
don't know
find that
anything. You don't
right.
know
They see
anything.
that right. They see a woman and they don't see the experience that comes with that change or that position. Because I know this lady years ago. She was I think it was a supervisor and then she became a director. But I felt like she was good because she came with experience. But I also noticed that her counterparts only see her as why she got the position, but not understanding that she comes with a certain level of experience. And I find that sometimes that could be challenging as a woman. Like, why do we have to buckle and show our work to get this position or this, this new position that we get or this new, like, why we have to buckle and have to show our muscle now? Like, why
Right.
shouldn't my experience be enough or my
Enough.
skills,
Correct.
right?
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Emily's gonna tell us how to manage that because yeah, that's a big deal, Emily.
It's a big deal. And
Yeah,
and the reality is that, I mean, it's almost like it's like a microaggression over the entire situation, because
yeah,
already
Hmm.
when you come in as a woman who's a leader and who's leading a change process, people are already almost implicitly questioning your authority, right?
hmm,
Questioning
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
credibility.
Yeah.
And especially if you come in and you have a little bit different of an approach, right? I
yes,
think if you come
yeah,
in kind of with that very traditional leadership style of, I have an initiative, this is what it's going to be, and let's get to it, that often might be more respected, right? Because it aligns with what we've considered traditional leadership, right?
yeah,
Like that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
in many ways what it seems like Elon Musk did with Twitter, right? He had an idea, he came in,
yeah,
he implemented it. Now, if you're a woman, especially a woman of color, and
yeah,
you're leading a change process, and you go about it in a way that is very inclusive, right? Incorporates everyone's idea, is communicative, um, operates on an elongated timeline. People can really push up against that, right?
yeah,
And they can blame you. They can question your experience, your credibility. And then also there can be a lot of projections onto leaders who are,
Hmm.
uh, overseeing change processes. So that part about being a woman of color,
yeah,
and being in a leadership position, you have to also navigate that other component of it, right? Which is not only the uncertainty that comes with any change process, right? And then also managing employees throughout that process.
Yeah.
Then you also have to deal with the external criticism, the external blame, projections, which oftentimes, which may be more about what people are experiencing internally as opposed to the actual leadership that's being exercised.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
true. I feel like, especially when it's a job where the people, they say you coming in, or you're coming into a position, and the people before you must have been cool or allow certain things to happen at the particular job, and you have a certain view and a certain standard or certain values that you want to bring in, and people buck with you, like they're like, no, the person before, or they allowed you to do certain things. And I thought about that because I just had a conversation with a nurse, and she became a director. She mentioned that to me. She said, when I got this position, a lot of people just fought me on it because the person previous to
Mhm.
me allowed a lot of stuff. They came late. They allowed them to, if you're going to call out, contact another employee, you're supposed to contacting following the protocol, the company's protocol. So she said she had a lot of like everybody was just fighting her on it.
Um,
And, you know, I was like, that had to be hard.
Yes.
right,
And
right. And
you
for
know,
her, oh, go ahead, Gail.
no, you go ahead, Emily.
Oh, and I was just going to say too, but like, what really is the problem there? It doesn't sound like it's the nurse who became a director. It doesn't sound like she's the
Yeah,
problem there, right? Sounds
yeah,
like she's doing what's like necessary to have like a healthy, functioning workplace,
right,
right?
right.
And that's what I was saying earlier about people's day-to-day reality. People will fight to keep their day-to-day reality, in a way that serves them best.
Yeah, yeah,
But what serves an individual best may not be what serves the entire organization the best, or the mission
Mhm.
of the company
hmm,
or the nonprofit, right? And so that's important to keep in mind too, right? Is that
yeah,
especially as a leader, because a leader, to use your the nurse who became a director as an example, I'm sure she's being held accountable for the results,
yeah,
right? She
right.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
Yeah,
true. Yeah,
yeah,
she did
right.
mention that.
Yeah,
She mentioned
exactly.
that
So
to me.
she's the one who's going to be held
Yeah,
accountable, right? Um, and she probably, that probably her experience or expertise to be able to deal with the things that it sounds like were not happening in that department. Her expertise to deal with those things is probably why she's in the position, right? Or probably why she was hired for that position.
yeah,
um, and employees don't always see that part of it, right? And employees, rarely is it front of mind for them to be understanding that a leader has will be held accountable for the results that do or do not happen, right?
yeah. That is true. I mean, that is true because I know when I became a supervisor, it's like I had team members, but everything that happened was they was coming to me about. And then I have to, ask anything you have to answer to people.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's not like you don't. It's not like you want to be so difficult, but you also have a responsibility to do. You want to create a
Mhm.
fair, nice environment for everybody to work on, but at the same time respect whatever that policy is, right? Um,
Mhm.
because you do have to answer somebody. I mean, that's just part of the game, you know.
Yeah,
Yes.
So
yeah, it
But
is.
there are big changes, and there are little changes that become big changes. So if we use Karen's example, I find a lot of the time we might take a very good leader from the pool, and we put them in charge. We make them the supervisor or the manager
hmm,
because they were very good within the team. But to manage other people and supervise other people, you actually need a whole different set of skills. So that is a change, and it needs to be managed. And then when this person, they can't fill this role as they should because they haven't gotten the support, so they're not doing their job, their
yeah,
new job, they're getting pushback from their team who they don't feel they're being supported. And God forbid you were one of those people, you were a very good worker, but you had a lot to say about your leaders. And now you are managing your team and representing your leaders. It's a whole big drama kind of thing. And it starts out being a little change, and the little changes, I'm just promoting somebody. But it becomes a big deal because you didn't think that change through and you didn't manage that change process properly. And that's how a little change then turns into a whole big change. And you spend more time trying to fix things rather than, planning for them properly. And that was going to be my question for you, Emily, where what happens in a situation like that, A, and B, sometimes you find, especially in industries which are led a lot by males, maybe construction industry, stuff like that, and then you bring a woman in, and then you find she doesn't get the respect that she deserves, even though she has all of the skills, she has all of the experience, but people don't take her seriously, even though she has her hammer and whatever else they're using today to construct. But she can do the same job as a man.
Yeah, that happens in some industries.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, especially over the last 2 years, so many managers have been expected to lead on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion
Hmm.
without really having the tools. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
many managers, just now for the first time are actually really, digging deep into the trainings around DEI or really thinking about how those issues show up in the world and also at work, right? So I think that that's one. And I think there are times when leaders can underestimate what the impact of a particular change will be, right? And so, for
Mm-hmm.
your example, Gail, someone who's a peer on the team then gets promoted to a leadership
Mm-hmm.
position, and then how that changes the dynamics within a workplace, right?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a common one, right? And you know, the idea of having like a smooth change process with zero conflict, with zero people who are dissatisfied with the changes, I think is a myth, right? I think that that's a unicorn if
It
it
is.
ever
Yeah, that's
happens,
It is.
right?
true.
And so rather, it's about um, you know understanding that that's part of the process, and just because there is some conflict, because there are some people who are dissatisfied with the change, that's part of the process. It doesn't mean that anything is wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it does need to be managed, and it does need to be engaged. I mean, I think
Yeah.
oftentimes where leaders you know get themselves in trouble or start to contribute to workplace cultures that can become dysfunctional or that can become toxic or have toxic elements within them is when leaders ignore those kinds of interpersonal dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those things actually really do need to be engaged. And there needs to be conversations about those things, because if you have employees who feel as though they can't speak up in their workplace, they'll speak about it in other places or in other ways,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
Yeah.
could lead to gossip or could create, um, as I said earlier, toxic elements within the workplace, and that's what you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to happen. Can't always control it, but you can create a space where those opinions and feelings and concerns, can be voiced constructively within the workplace, and that's important.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's true. That's definitely important. But how do you think maybe leaders' expectation when it comes to the change, right? There's so I mean, just from my experience, I think they think that the minute you said this change, people are supposed to automatically get it and they're gonna follow through. It doesn't work like that. Like if it's certain changes take time, especially if you have a company where changes is happening all the time. Especially in the healthcare field, changes are happening all the time. Policies and procedure compliance are changing all the time. So can you really expect me to get it at the first time you announce it?
I
Yeah.
Like
do. I really do, Karen. I expect you to get it.
that's what we, you know what I mean. I was like no, and I mean that's even with the jobs that I had. It's like policies, the last month policy is different than this month policy. Now I gotta kind of get the new policy, and sometimes you can um make a not so much a mistake, but try to understand or try, okay, I gotta remember that particular policy. So I think it's some form of expectation with leaders. It's a little bit off when it comes to the expected to automatically get it the first time it's announced, and I think that's not realistic. Everybody doesn't. It's a job, and a lot of people once they leave the job, the policies at the they go home. They don't think about it. They only think about it while they're working. So I think that's also something to think about. Maybe the leader's expectation when it comes to change. You know.
Well, I agree with that. I think everyone's expectations for change,
Yeah.
because I think as a leader, often you have a view from which the change seems so much more logical, right? Like
Yeah.
you can see the big picture, like all of the forces at play, and you understand clearly why this change needs to take place and why this change needs to take place now. And that's often front of mind for leaders and executives, right?
Hmm.
Um, so that's oftentimes where I think there can be like a misalignment with the
Yeah.
expectation
Yeah.
when a change happens, because the reality is that every single person needs to prepare for change, right? It is
Yeah.
very human, to resist change, right?
Yeah.
Especially if the status quo was
Mhm.
working for you, right? Or you were
Yeah.
just comfortable. Maybe the status quo wasn't working for you, but you were comfortable in it, right?
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
it's very human to resist change. Um, and so, the preparation process is really important, and
Yeah.
especially for employees, because of the way that change so often impacts an employee's day-to-day reality, which becomes their lived reality at work, and often relates to like their level of stress even when they leave work. That
Mhm.
preparation period is incredibly important, right? So that they can continue to stay present and really have all the mental and emotional faculties to actually work through that change. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, Gabe. You wanted to say something before I don't know if you wanted
No,
to
I wasn't
comment
really
on
going to
that.
say anything. I was just thinking about the other types of changes that they have, Emily, where the leader may have thought about a change, and before he can roll his change out effectively, I, as the employee, I hear about the change on the outside before it's really been communicated on the inside. And I only raise
Yeah.
that because when something like that happens, you know that when you finally roll out that conversation about the change, it's not, you're starting off wrong. You're already starting off wrong because it's out there, and I'm gonna feel, oh, I heard it on the street. You didn't tell me. You don't care about me. I'm the last to know. And especially if that's your normal modus operandi, it's gonna be tough. So I think that I agree with you, Emily, that we should be prepared for change, but sometimes, they say the only thing constant in life is change, and sometimes it can be unexpected.
Yeah.
But if your team sees you as, a good leader, somebody who supports them, you're empathetic, you try to involve and engage them when you do have to roll out something that's unexpected, and you tell them, listen, guys, this is why, this is what's happening, this is what we need to do, let's have a conversation. It needs to be rolled out ASAP, but we are team. I think that's a whole different level of conversation other than I hear it on the street, or I say this is how it has to be done, so you do it, or you look for employment elsewhere, or even with COVID and the downsizing, I still feel strongly that some leaders could have had a conversation with their teams, because I know a lot of those knee jerk reactions were probably as a result of, no money coming in and you have to pay your team, and salaries. Salary is always a big ticket item on your profit and
Hmm.
loss, but I still think that you could have had a conversation with your team, because maybe some people would have preferred to, if they had to, stay with the company, get a lower salary, or work shorter hours, or let's see how we can ride through this rather than cut ties. And it could be the same thing with Twitter. You know, sending home everybody is not usually the answer. It's a short term fix if
Yeah.
you're trying to save money and cut costs. And you're
Yeah.
sending home resources, all of that knowledge that resides in your team's heads. You're sending it away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, there's so much to learn from your team and your employees, particularly in these, cases of change, because as you know, a leader and executive, you don't have the insight into the day to day because that's not your experience in the
Mm-hmm.
organization, right? And so you really do need to rely on your team, on your employees to share their insights and their feedback throughout the process. Um, I think too, it's really important that leaders communicate like the why of the change. I think, gone are the days where um, a workforce just simply accepts things because the boss said so. You know, millennials and Gen Z, like, we're socialized
Mm-hmm.
differently, and they're not having it. And so it's incredibly important to also communicate that why throughout the process, and to communicate that why when things get a little bit difficult, when things get challenging. And, Gail, to go back to your original point, if you don't have buy in on that from the very beginning, then that's going to make the entire process more challenging. And I would say that, um, it's my feeling that the best leadership would actually really include their employees in actually developing the change, and also determining the timeline for that change. And as I said earlier, it's really important that the change is actually responsive to something that is or is not happening in the organization, and is somehow creating a problem, or there's a way that we could increase our efficacy or increase our impact. And so if that's not happening, there may be other issues in that workplace which could negatively impact the change process overall.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like they do all this cutting, and then what happens? They just add more tasks for somebody else to do.
Correct.
Right. I think too, but sometimes people, and I think that this is why it's so important, and particularly for women of color, to see the change process as an opportunity, right? To look at it and say, okay, what are the ways that I can negotiate my workload here, right? Like, what are the opportunities for me to develop professionally in the ways that serve my goals? Because there are going to be changes like that, right? And that is the central agreement in a workplace, right? It's an exchange of labor for compensation, right? So when our labor expectations change, then so too our compensation needs to change, right? And we can negotiate around those things. And it's important that we see these change processes as an opportunity to do so, right? And
Yeah.
not only to negotiate our pay and our labor and expectations, but also what values do we want to see in our workplace, particularly during the process of change, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an opportunity to double down on diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, right? That can often be, something that's missing in not only in change processes, but when new initiatives come and they only come from leadership, right? So this is an opportunity to have those kinds of conversations, particularly as women of color.
Mm-hmm.
No, I
Well
agree.
said.
You know what's funny? Because now I hear a lot about emotional intelligence, and it's played different parts in different areas and all aspects of your life. So how does that play into change?
Yeah. Yeah, I think emotional intelligence is incredibly important. And I think emotional intelligence, and certainly social emotional intelligence, is often the differentiator for employees who stay, make it through the change, and then end up in roles that they're actually happy with, and those who don't, right? And so, it's important to, as we said earlier, um, for that nurse who became a director to
Yeah.
understand that, the leader, they're accountable to creating results, right? And they have a lot of pressure as well. So to find ways to work collaboratively through the change process is incredibly important for employees. And it's not necessarily easy to navigate that process of change, right? So social
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence will help employees with that. And then on the flip side, for a leader who's leading a change process, and Karen, the example of the nurse who became a director
Yeah.
is such a good example, because inevitably leaders are going to be blamed for things. Inevitably, leaders' strategy and their leadership is going to be criticized,
Yeah.
fairly or unfairly, right? And then there can be all kinds of projections on leaders, and so in order to manage that, right, one has to have the social emotional intelligence to understand, what's theirs, what's not theirs, and then also how to continue to move a group of employees forward towards the change, even despite the criticism, right? Even
Yeah.
despite their own dissatisfaction sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to know how to, all components just, even if you don't agree with somebody's perspective, you can't be like, I don't agree with you. At least listen to it. Even if you don't agree, that's okay. Because I honestly feel like we're not all going to agree on something. But I think allowing a person to say whatever it is they're going to say, and allow them to express themselves and take it in, I think that's important part of being a leader. And just being having a supervision position. We don't have, depending on what that is. But I think emotional intelligence is I didn't realize how important it is. So we started kind of researching this, and that's when I was like, oh, it does play a big part. Because I always hear it on the sense of social, your personal life, not on a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something that I think a lot of leaders should have. And not only that, how many people are good in the emotional, have that awareness about their emotional intelligence, right? To lead other people. I think that's also a key as well, a key component, you know.
Right, right. And I think social emotional intelligence helps us too to stay engaged even when we disagree.
Yeah,
Right, we may
definitely.
disagree with a leader or a leader's decision. We may even disagree with, the direction of a change.
Right.
But to be able to stay engaged and communicate through that, even though we disagree, that's where a lot of power lies. Right.
Yes.
And that's what we have to remember, particularly as women of color, and employees in workplaces, right? Is that we can stay engaged, we can continue to speak up, even if we disagree. And in fact, that might be when it's most important, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Right.
some of those
Exactly.
moments are the biggest opportunities to engage because you have a reason. You have a reason to engage rather than no
Yeah.
reason. And that leads me into my second to last comment. What about feedback, Emily? I had a person, a leader, and they would engage as a result of conflict. So if they're having a conflict with you, Emily, they would say, okay, I'm gonna have this conversation with Emily, and we're gonna talk about all these different things. The challenge I had was there would be a conversation with Emily, and Emily would go away thinking there's gonna be resolution, but that person was really only ticking the box of having the conversation. And I know that that's come up too in DEI because some people are being employed to tick a box, but then it ends up being frustrating for most people. And I think that is so sad that you have a conversation with me and you make me think I'm really listening to you. I value your thoughts, your opinions, your feedback, and then I go away and nothing happens because you never really were going to take me seriously anyway. You just wanted me, maybe not to leave or not to keep talking to other members on the team. So how important is not only getting feedback, especially during times of conflict when you need to engage your team, but giving an update because, yes, every suggestion or every opinion, you may not be able to implement it. It may not make sense.
Right.
But after you invite me to give my feedback, I believe that there should be some kind of follow up to say, okay, guys, we got all these great suggestions. We can't implement all, or we can't implement this specific one for this reason, maybe not at this time, maybe in the future. How important is feedback after that initial kind of engagement, especially when there's going to be a change?
That's a good
I,
question.
yeah, it's a great question. And it's really important because the thing is that employees can often mistake being heard for getting what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, you may hear your employees and you may not be able to give them what they want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, in those instances, it's really important to communicate why you cannot give your employees what they want, right? Transparency around that is incredibly important. And maybe every employee still won't understand it, but at least the transparency was there, and at least, you know, a leader is saying, "Listen, I'm working with everyone here, right? Your voice still matters. Um, Rarely is it that anyone in the workplace is going to get everything they want, right? And then sometimes outside external forces dictate what we can and cannot do. But having that transparency, and then also reinforcing that this is a process, right? So maybe everybody didn't get what they want this time, but there's going to be other times where, I'm going to want your feedback, and perhaps everybody will be able to get what they want in that instance, right? But
Mm-hmm.
transparency around that and actually ensuring that it's a feedback loop, right, is the important part, because I often see leaders make the mistake of, not wanting to disappoint their employees, or
Mm-hmm.
expecting
Mm-hmm.
that there will be, some kind of pushback or resistance if the employees don't get what they wanted. And so they avoid the conversation. But that conversation is key.
Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
is. It really is. I mean, that's a good point, Gail, because I know every time I made a suggestion, they never come back. So
Yeah,
it
yeah,
makes
but
you
that's
think like,
because
damn,
what Emily said. Emily said,
yeah,
and that is
that's
such different.
true.
Employees can mistake being heard
They
for getting
can.
what they want, and I
Yeah.
think that is the impression that a lot of leaders give them. Oh, you come and talk to me, lay all on the table. I'm gonna fix it. No, sometimes
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
fix, and
That's
then
true.
you have then that mess to try to start out because no, I'm disappointed in you. I'm disillusioned. They only say stuff. They don't, their actions don't match their words, which is
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting. You need to manage that expectation as well. So Emily, I mean, I'm gonna have to come and work with you because you seem like you're a very good leader. I'll send you my resume when we
Thank
finish.
Thank you.
you. Happy to see it.
So, can you,
Yeah.
if we had to wrap up today's show, what would be the four tips you would give us for
Hmm.
managing more
Mhm.
effective change in the workplace? If you had to
Mhm.
give us four tips.
Yeah. Okay. So number one for Black women in particular, that change is an opportunity to speak up and advocate for positive impacts that you want to see, right? I mean, that could be for assignments, for pay, for values that you want to see reflected in your workplace, or you want to see reflected in the change. See change as an opportunity to have a voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
For leaders, absolutely create like many opportunities for feedback. Okay. It is incredibly important that employees have multiple channels to give feedback. And then, of course, that you also, you listen to that feedback, and then also earnestly seek it, right? Genuinely seek the feedback, and care about what their experience is throughout the change process. And then again, for employees, and Black women in particular, see the change as an opportunity for growth, right? So think to yourself, how can this change process, how can it serve my bigger professional development goals, right? How can this change process um, have a positive impact on my working experience here, right? Really actively look for the opportunity in the change. And then the fourth for leaders is what we just talked about, Gail. So when you cannot meet the expectations of your employees, meet that with transparency. Make sure to communicate why, so that your employees know that you're honoring the conversation that you had with them, and that you tried to meet their expectations, or you genuinely considered it, and here are the reasons why it's not happening. And the biggest benefit of that is not that your employees are going to not be disappointed, or that they're not going to be disgruntled for some amount of time, but that you fostered an open conversation about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the important part, that
Oh,
it's out in the open and it's transparent.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I put him up there.
Yeah.
I forgot to put the four for this one, but
Thank you.
sorry.
I strongly believe, Emily, that at the end
Yeah.
of the day, employees just want to know. I don't think they care how bad the news is. They just want to know. So just tell me, and let's move on. Don't let me hear it on the street.
Right.
Don't jump me and say this is what we're doing from tomorrow. Get with the program. I think they just want to be respected and to have you communicate with them in a way that they feel valued as human beings
Yeah.
even
Uh,
before being
yeah.
an employee.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. No,
true.
yeah, absolutely. And I think even feeling valued, I mean, it's very subjective. But I think
Mhm.
um, for leaders to demonstrate the utmost of respect for their employees goes a long way, right?
Mhm.
To
Mm-hmm.
your point, Gail, is that, just meet me as another human being who you respect, right? So
Yeah.
if
Yeah,
impending change, let me know about that, right? Have, the common
right.
courtesy and respect to tell me about that. But then also that allow whether or not employees agree with the change or with your approach, um, it's a way that they can say, okay, well, this person they can respect that leadership, right? Because there was a level of boldness, a level of confidence there. When you can, in a straightforward way, in a respectful way, initiate a difficult conversation, right? Most people can respect that.
Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
true.
Yeah.
I know.
So I know that Emily is going to give us some information now on different things she's offering, but I also wanted to mention that I think that leaders need a little hand holding. So while she tells us about her stuff, I just wanted to let everybody know I'm going to be having a masterclass for leaders on communication techniques and how to survive that change process. And you can send me an email for more information. It's going to be January 2023, and they can send anybody interested can send me an email at info@envisiontraining.com. Karen is going to put it up on the screen for you so that you can get the spelling right. Info at
Mhm.
envisiontraining.com, and we're going to help you lead a little better, especially when it comes to changes which affect your
Yeah.
employees and your organization. So
Yeah,
tell
this
us, Emily,
mhm.
what do you have for our viewers today?
Yeah, so we are opening our community for women of color leaders in January 2023. So if people are interested, they should send me a direct message. We will help you navigate through challenges at work and help you reach your next level of leadership. So if you're interested in joining a community of women of color professionals, then send me a direct message.
Okay, I put your I'm gonna put Emily's LinkedIn, pretty much everything. Website, email,
Yeah.
Instagram, so you
Mm-hmm.
can't say you can't find it. So they can
Right,
find you
right.
always,
Amazing.
you
Yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I'm gonna share that with everyone.
yeah, exactly. Follow me on Instagram too if you want these tips on a regular basis. So that's at Hey Emily Raquel. And Karen, you can put that in there if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
yeah,
Okay, thank
sure.
you. Yeah.
Here's the that's the website. Here's the you said at Instagram I pay Emily Raquel, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. So, Emily, this was a very interesting conversation as usual. We love having you because it's always so engaging, and we learn so much. You drop all these really juicy nuggets for us. Juicy is my word. I really meant valuable and meaningful.
Invaluable.
Yeah, I think
Right.
what I love about our conversations is that there's so much you can take away and use readily in your own, personal and professional life, especially when it comes to taking those opportunities to speak up and use your voice for change
Yeah.
when change happens, and see it not as negative but something that can be positive. And when you use your voice, you don't know who else you're speaking up for, because a lot of people are afraid to use their voice, but you only need that one person to step up to show the
Yeah.
others, oh wow, Emily did it and she survived. Let's see if we would survive also. So I think
Yeah.
using your voice is very powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I
that's
would
true.
even say, yeah, definitely. And I would even say when you see that one woman of color who speaks up and uses her voice, and you see that she's okay, join her,
Mhm.
support her,
Right.
Yeah,
right? Do it together. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
there's
Yeah,
strength
that's
in
true.
numbers.
Right.
Mhm.
That's true. There's definitely strength in numbers. And
Without a
I
doubt.
enjoyed I enjoyed today's live.
Yeah.
So we are
So
closing. Any last words? I don't know if you guys
no
want to
last
give
words,
any
just
last words.
everybody. Thanks, Emily, and don't forget to
Thank
follow
you.
Karen and I over on LinkedIn. We're also on YouTube and on Instagram or wherever you think we are. Facebook and Instagram, of course, but make sure you follow us specifically on LinkedIn, which is where we spend a lot of our time and where we meet all of these great people like Emily and have these really
Yeah,
interesting
conversation.
conversations
Yeah.
on things that really matter for us today.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, again for showing up and just, it's like giving us the D, giving us
Yeah,
the
being
real,
your awesome self.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
I
right,
love
Bye
guys.
bye.
it. Great show. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you. Have a
welcome.
good Sunday, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for being here.
Bye.